let's get over to our last coach that we're going to talk about on our last program. We're going to go over to East Carolina. One of the surprises to me of the year. Okay, Mike Houston, canned. Okay, maybe not so surprising. Blake Harrell comes in as the interim head coach, right? I guess getting promoted from defensive coordinator spot. And they win 5 straight games. They make it to a bowl game. They win the bowl game, okay, against a. I think you and I will both admit that NC State team was not fantastic, but anytime you can get a win over a Power 5 team, Power 4 team in
An
a
in-state
bowl
Power
game,
4 team, too. How about that?
yeah. So I don't know, that really nice work right there, okay? And when I'm looking at East Carolina, okay, as a program, okay, what are the expectations, okay, of these East Carolina Pirate fans? I think the fans maybe have higher expectations than like maybe the reality is. Okay, you've had one 10-win season in the last 30 years. Okay, however, the caveat is you are now in a conference in which you are better able to compete. All right, there's no more Cincinnati. There's no more Houston. There's yes, Memphis is there. No more SMU. Like Tulane, USF, right, and Memphis. You four teams, right, have significantly more resources than just about every other team in this conference. You have a pretty solid geography over there in Carolinas. There's sneaky talent there. You're fourth right now in your recruiting class in 2025. I understand. I don't necessarily understand why, East Carolina fans were as frustrated as maybe, I guess, yeah, going 2-10, right, and then following up, starting the season 3-4, kind of collapsing. That's not good. That's not the expectation for East Carolina, right? But 6, 7, 8 wins previous to this conference realignment would have been pretty solid every year, I think. But I understand that East Carolina fans want more. I also understand that the rest of the athletic department honestly is looking pretty good, right? John Gilbert, the AD there, I think he's fine. I mean, think about what he's done, retaining Cliff Godwin over there, for that baseball team. I mean, Cliff Godwin's been there, what, 6, 7 years? And how many times has he been, on job board, like just rumored to be taking a job somewhere else? I mean, even like the A&M job this past year, Cliff Godwin was, a name that kept popping up. I think, and then Michael Schwartz, we'll see what he does, for that basketball team and that American Conference. But I think like the American Conference – with this team, with their resources, with their geography, is able to compete, right? And I think John Gilbert did his homework, right, on Blake Harrell. I mean, obviously they had him inside that building, and I think he earned the job. All right, now it's time for him to go prove it. He may have a shorter leash than if you were to hire someone outside of the program, but the reality is that that's fine. Okay, time for Blake Harrell to prove it. All right, you got a great staff that I know that you're going to talk about a lot. That he retained some of those guys that he retained on staff were some of the best recruiters, in that conference. Okay. With the caveat, you did lose Montanard to Oklahoma State. That is kind of a huge loss over there at cornerback. But you've had really talented teams, right? You were starting the wrong quarterback this year at the beginning of the year. I don't know, man. I think this is a good hire. Obviously, I think it's the one that you had to do, right? Blake Harrell obviously earned it. His extended interview of, being the head coach and going 5-1, winning a bowl game is, I think, plenty. But it'll be interesting to see what kind of leash he has, if things don't necessarily go the way that East Carolina wants it to go.
Yeah, I think not to call it a budget hire at all, but I think it just worked out really nicely and it allows you to do other things too. I'll get into the staff in a little bit in terms of the coaching staff, but how about, just the football ops, and that general staff that Blake Harrell's done a very good job, I think, making a priority, right? So you're going out and you hired a general manager, right, a director of operations, and you got a new head strength coach, which all are super, super vital to programs. Now, the last one has been around forever. Obviously, strength coach is not a new title in college football, but now more than ever, having a GM, right, and director of operations, people that are very good at their job. These are things that are more important now and that are going to continue to be more important. So credit Harrell and credit the administration, John Gilbert, for letting him go out and do that, right? So the GM is Noah Joseph, right? He is the first general manager in East Carolina history. He'll be dealing with NIL, he'll be dealing with revenue sharing, roster construction, recruiting. I think they likened him to like a chief of staff, right? That you see the president and different politicians have, right? That's the reality of what it is, right? He was doing a similar role at Purdue, so he's familiar with it at somewhat of a level. And also, he's been a coach for 20 years in college football. So he has that kind of background as well, right? The director of football operations, Lydia West, will be very interesting there as well. I think that's a good hire as well from the people. It sounds like they're excited about that. And then, Mike Sirignano is going to be the new head strength coach. We'll see how that works out for them. So obviously, those are big time hires, right? Team people that will not, make a direct impact on the outcome of 2024 or 2025, excuse me. But like the reality is like they are in 2025 and beyond. Such big roles to have, and credit, Harrell for getting that done and kind of moving quickly on that, which is important. The coaching staff, right? Getting into that. So you're going to have a lot of mainstays there, which is interesting, right? For a staff, I think that, you know, underperformed, I think is the right term, right? With that schedule, with other things, in their
with the
conferences,
talent. Yeah.
with the talent and potential of that program, having some of those losing seasons like you did with Mike Houston more recently, and I guess early on too in the past, it's not ideal, right? But the reality is you got guys coming back. Continuity in that program, I think, is not a terrible thing at all. And Blake Harrell is a guy that trusts these guys. Those guys were having the team prepared and playing very, very well down the stretch. Now, I will say this as a disclaimer, right? We talked about East Carolina and their schedule, right, as being one of the easiest in college football. And it got really easy down the stretch when they went on the winning streak of Temple and
Yeah.
Florida Atlantic and Tulsa and North Texas, right? You're seeing a trend here of teams that are not very good football teams. Now, the win against NC State, now, while it's not, this crazy Super Bowl win, I think is very impressive. And they also competed with the Navy team, that was also one of the better teams in the American. So I'll give them credit for that. I'm not going to discount their wins, but that's the reality too, right? Why I don't think this hire is a full-on A, and I'll get to my grade later. Now let's get to the coaching staff, right? So the defense coordinator and the cornerback coach, right? Those are the only two new hires that they went out and got. So I'll start with the defense coordinator, Josh Aldridge, right? He was hired for ECU. He was at Auburn the past couple of years, coaching the defensive ends in 2024. He recruited and developed and played some damn good players in that edge group, Amaris Williams, Kieran Crawford, Jalen McLeod, and others in that room that they saw a big jump, I thought, from 2023 to 2024. Looks to do similar things at East Carolina. Now, it will be interesting because I believe Blake Harrell, who had been calling the plays for a long time, right, being defensive coordinator, even as an interim head coach, he was calling plays as well. It sounds like he's going to pass that off to Josh Aldridge, who's going to call the plays. Very interesting, but also I think a very good sign as a guy that's not super ego involved in himself, and also understanding the realities of a head coaching job in 2025 is so much more than just the football side of things. Very impressive there. So getting back to Aldridge, he was also a D-line coach and co-DC at Liberty, right? The connection between Harrell and him is when they were at Lenoir-Rhyne together, right? Harrell was there, or they were not there at the same time, but there were still connections there. And like I said, Aldridge will be calling the plays. The next coach I want to get to is the cornerback coach, right? Taron Williams, right? He's been at Old Dominion for a couple of years. He's, developed, Angelo Rankin, Lamarian James, couple of all Sun Belt cornerbacks there. He's also at Richmond and James Madison, so continuing the trend of those East Coast schools, right? So obviously familiarity with the geography there. His connection with Harold's also through the Lenoir-Rhyne, but he actually worked on the same staff. He did have crossover with Harrell and I guess Mike Houston as well, but really from 2010 to 2012, while Harrell was a DC, he was a defensive GA. So that's also, I think, very interesting. Love that he's bringing in a couple of guys that he has familiarity with, he trusts to do things, what he wants to do with his program. So obviously not a ton to break down with the coaching staff because, like I said, you have 6, 7, 8 remaining head coaches on that assistant staff, and obviously Blake Harrell is a guy that you're familiar with because you've been in that program for a while now. But obviously, I don't think those are bad things at all. I think with the way that they were playing at the end of the season, I think has a lot of hope for what it can be, in the coming couple of years. And it's also very telling about how everyone just loves him at East Carolina. And I'm not a guy that's is boots on the ground every day there at all, but the reality is what you've been hearing and reading and seeing is that everyone there loves him and has tons of support behind him. The players, the coaches, the administration. I think a lot of those alignment is a word that you're probably being overused in college football and in the NFL as well. Still very, very important, and it's also good to have. And also, I think the fact that his players love him too and supported him for this role is really impactful. I think, it's not the end all be all. It's not, an auto tell of being a fantastic head coach at all, but I think it's a necessity, in my opinion, right, to be a head coach and to have your players like you, right? So that's interesting, right? Obviously, with Blake Harrell, a lot will be remain to seen. We'll see what happens and what kind of different dynamics go from the kind of the Mike Houston era, and obviously he was kind of groomed in that era, but kind of as we transition into more of the full head coach Blake Harrell, and all that kind of stuff. It will still be super aggressive, still be high flying, obviously disciplined football team, but we'll see how it goes from there.
Yeah, in the American, you do draw. This would be a different Army team, right? But Army, Memphis, Tulane. All right, that's kind of three big ones right there. Um, and then you're out of conference. You actually play kind of a tough out of conference. You got to play at NC State, right? Going to Carter Finley's tough. You got to go to Coastal Carolina, right? And then BYU, who had a much better season this past year. So you're out of conference. You're probably looking at 1-3, maybe 2-2, right? If you find a way to win at Coastal Carolina, which I think you actually probably should, right? But yeah, and then you got to go. What's nice though is you get that home stretch where you basically play. Well, actually, we don't know what the schedule is going to look like, but you got 5 home games in conference, which is nice. Um, oh, sorry, no, never mind, I miscounted. That's 4. Yeah, but either way, it'll be interesting to see in this first year. Obviously, it's not going to be super telling, but like you said, the easy schedule that they had in that back half is very interesting, and I understand the concern if you're an East Carolina fan. Like, holy cow! Like, we literally just have the same staff. I get that. What's nice about that though is like your recruiting class was not hurt at all in any way, right? Um, you're still going to have Caden Hauser, I believe, right? He's still got a year of eligibility, and he's still there, and he played pretty well for you. Maybe not in the bowl game, but down the stretch, he played pretty solid football for you at quarterback. So I think there's some optimism heading into 2025. I still like this hire. I thought it was a pretty good hire. I think you kind of almost had to hire this guy. But, given the situation, right, you could see a shorter leash, like I've said before. Now, I guess my grade for this, okay, and it doesn't mean that I think Matt Entz, right, would be a better hire, right, for East Carolina than, I guess, Blake Harrell, right? However, grading systems, right? I gave Matt Entz a B hiring at Fresno State. It's based on expectations, right? At Fresno State, 5 of the last 12 years they've won 10. They've had 10-win seasons, right? There's a much higher expectation, right, at Fresno State. While expectations are rising at East Carolina, okay, and they have the fiscal, money and the athletic department and the geography to compete with some of these other teams in the American, the expectation may be raising. However, they're not super high. Like I said, only one 10-win season in 30 years. Um, yeah, I'm going to. I gave this higher B because I think he'll meet expectations. I think he'll reach bowl games, right? I think that uh, he may have a couple of seasons where he wins 8 games, 9 games. If he wins a bowl game, I don't necessarily think he's going to be a world beater, winning 10 games. I don't think he might. He could compete for conference championships every other year, but I think he meets expectations. I think he's a good coach. I think he knows what he's doing. I don't think John Gilbert with the momentum and the conference realignment, and I think John Gilbert did his homework. Right, he probably reviewed other options that he had and just saw, how the players were responding, the success of the team. He's like, all right, let's see how you do, Harold. So I'll give it a B. I think he can meet expectations.
Yeah, I'm a little bit higher, B plus here. But again, very similar here. I think he'll meet and maybe every once in a while, exceed expectations. To me, like you said, I think safe comes to mind, and why I know that doesn't get you super excited as a Pirates fan, but it's also super important this time too. And again, and we'll get into this in a lot of these G5 programs. The reality is like you get to spots where you're winning 9, 10, and 11 games in certain seasons, like you're putting yourself in a position to make the playoffs, which does wonders for your program in so many different reasons. And not that I'm saying that my expectation is that he should or will make the playoffs for ECU, but the reality is, like, I don't think it's crazy. You get a good draw in the out of conference, you get a good draw in conference, and you have to put yourself in a spot to absolutely do that. Yeah, I think it wasn't too long ago that Mike Houston was honestly winning 8 to 9 games, right, with this team, and I think if you can keep this continuity of the coaching staff, you keep developing and building, and obviously what he's been doing and pushing the right buttons, I could see not linear growth, but I could see somewhat growth throughout a couple 4 5 seasons with East Carolina. I think if he's still the head coach after 5 seasons, I think this is absolutely a success, for John Gilbert and this ECU roster, or excuse me, the ECU program.